ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? All right, so let's continue the GTK drawing area tutorial. So last time we went through and did kind of just a lot of configuration and setup that needed to be put in place for effectively good structural support. But today we're going to really pretty much go through and do the drawing related stuff, and we pretty much have most of the infrastructure that is needed to make this all work. There is one thing that we're going to need to do, a couple of things that we're going to need to do, one of them of which I've already kind of done. First and foremost, we're going to need to go through and create a configure event on the draw area. So I've already done this where I went through and clicked on signals, and I've got configure event set to go to the onConfigure method. Okay, so this is going to be the last part of the required signals that we need for Glade to work, or not Glade, but for our program to work, is the onConfigure event. That is again on the drawing area, okay? And we'll talk about the configure event in a moment here, but let's go ahead and I'm just going to quickly create a method for that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. I'm going to move this above where the draw area is here, and we're just going to say, I'm going to create this, I'm going to create that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to also call this area. Okay. We still have our event, and we also now have data that we may or may not pass to it. So I'm just going to set that to be none. Okay. And so really the core of the logic kind of that's going on here is with these three methods. Okay. There's a lot, there's stuff that goes on that makes all of this kind of work when we create the drawing events and stuff like that. So, right now what we're going to do is just first off the configure, because the onMotion is more about the control aspect of it, whereas the onDraw and onConfigure are kind of critical to make this whole thing work. So the GTK drawing area, like I said before, relies on Cairo. Cairo is really what kind of you interact with and you use to draw stuff to the draw area. The draw area has signals that you expose, such as the onDraw event, but Cairo will then be the one that actually has all the information that gets drawn to that draw area. So we're going to go ahead and actually need to import this for this to work. I'm going to go through and say Cairo, comma, and we're good to go. We've got the rest of the imports that we need. So basically, what Cairo has is the brush and the canvas, I'm going to call it, okay? And then that information gets drawn effectively to the draw area widget, okay? So the canvas for Cairo is actually called surface. So it's the surface that you're drawing on, and then that surface gets rendered to the draw area, okay? So what we need to do then is actually set up our surface on the draw area, okay? So what we're going to do, and by the way, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of going on in the configure event that's going to be a little bit harder to explain without just kind of setting up and typing it out. So I'm just going to go ahead and do just that. I'm just going to talk about it a little bit as best as I can, but we're going to kind of go ahead and get to it here, where we get underscore ALOCATED underscore WIDTH. We're going to get allocated width. We're going to get I'm going to push that down, by the way, too. We're going to get area height, and we're going to call that height. And then what we're going to do is, so again, like I mentioned, we're going to have a surface. And so Cairo actually has different types of surfaces that you can work against. And the ones that I'm really aware of are the image surface as well as the vector surface. And for this purpose in tutorial, we're going to just cover the image surface, because pretty much you're going to get then, you're going to understand then how to apply the vector surface. But anyway, so I'm going to go through, and we're actually going to create a temporary reference here. So we're going to do just that. Surface is equal to Cairo dot image surface parentheses, and then I'm just going to say Cairo dot I don't remember what the term was. Format, I think. Yeah. So we got format, and then I'm going to set this to ARGB32. And then we're going to do AW and AH here. AH. So quickly what I'm doing here is we're creating a surface. We're basing that surface on the size of the area width and height. Okay? Now, this is important to note because what we're doing is we're going through, and when the draw area updates in size or width or something else, really, we want to go through and create a surface that scales to that information. Now, it's worth noting, though, that we also want to transfer the former surface to the new surface. Okay? In addition to all of that, we want to ensure that the surface does not shrink if we expand it. Because what will happen is if we shrink the surface, we'll lose the information that we drew on the bigger surface. So there are a couple of things that are going on in the configure event that kind of keep track of all of this. And that's why I'm kind of going through and typing it out as is. So I'm going to try to do my best to explain what's going on, but it may not be clear until we kind of go through and, we kind of go step through it and have actually something going on. So basically, here we have the surface. We're creating the new surface. Now, really what we need to do is actually have also a reference to the surface or the current surface. So I'm just going to go through and set that here. And I hit Control B for some reason. I'm going to say none. We're going to just default this to none. And then say surface. So this really kind of means this is our surface that we're going to reference against. And in other contexts of drawing, such as the motion or line draws and all that, we need that surface information. So that's why we're kind of creating a global surface type of reference. Okay, so then what we need to say is, okay, well, if we don't have a surface, if we have a surface, we need to then update the surface. And this is where we kind of go through and say, if scaling create new surface. Okay, so then we're going to say, and that's not scaling, that's failing. Okay, great job, me. If scaling. So if here self.surface, okay, is not none. Okay, and then we're going to say here equals underscore surface. So you can kind of get where the structure is. So if surface and scaling create new surface. Actually, I should say maybe and area updated. Okay. So this is just to go through and kind of get the structure. So if we have the surface already, what we need to do then is copy that surface, the old surface, to the new surface, because the new surface in theory is going to be bigger. But we also want to check against that to determine whether or not we are getting bigger. Because if we're not getting bigger, then we really don't want to do anything, right? Now what we're going to do is say, well, surface width equals self.surface, and that should be also here. In this instance, actually, it's just going to be get underscore width, and then we're just going to do sh equals self.surface.get height. Okay, and so what we're saying then is, well, okay, well, actually, we don't want to do it that way. We want to then say if AW less than SW or AH less than SH, return false. And we also, by the way, need to do that to here. So the returning of the false, by the way, prevents looping on this configure event, I believe. Yeah. So, okay. So we're basically saying if we've shrunk, oh my god, I cannot, yeah, if we've shrunk, keep old surface. Okay. I mean, there's probably a better way to cleanly program this out rather than returning multiple falses and stuff like that. I don't really care. Whatever. Anyway, so if we've shrunk keep old surface, i.e. we're just going to return. Then what we need to say is the new surface, we want to draw a background. So draw background. Draw background white. Technically, we should say that we if we wanted to have a transparent background, we wouldn't draw a background. And then if we do want, a background, we do keep it. But anyway, in this instance, we're going to just have a white background. But again, you can keep this transparent and then do like PNG type images. I mean, you could do PNG images with a white background too. It's just that you wouldn't keep that transparency information. Anyway, but we're going to now go ahead and do draw background. Okay, so we have an image surface. What we need to do is create a brush to effectively draw on that surface. Okay, so we're going to create a brush, and really the brush is actually the context. Remember what I mentioned last time, or maybe I didn't mention it last time. So the brush is the context. It's got actually more information than simply color and size, right? It actually has information about the canvas. Excuse me. It has more than just simply brush information. But for the sake of trying to understand what's going on, I'm just going to call this the brush, because the brush is what we actually it's what we use to actually draw stuff and do stuff. And that's why I like to call it the brush, because that's the thing that's actually doing the thing, right? Anyway, so what we need to do here is we create the brush. So we're going to create as equal to Cairo, right? And then say dot context. Again, remember I had said it was context, not brush, but we're going to create the context, and we're going to say underscore surface. So we're basically we're effectively setting up the brush to draw to that surface. Okay. So then what we can just say is brush. Okay. And then say dot rectangle. Okay. And then what we can do is actually okay. Now, what we're saying here is basically we're saying draw a rectangle on the surface with starting at x, y, x, comma, y, comma, width, comma, height. Okay. And then what we need to do is say, well, we need to set the color. Okay, because we want it to be white. We're going to go through and then say brush set source. So set source underscore color, or is it RGB? It's RGB, I'm sorry. So we're going to say brush set source, and then we're going to go through and then give it just the color information. In this instance, we're just going to do 0, 0, 0, comma 1.0. Okay. And then we can just say brush.fill. Fill. So this is kind of important to right now talk about what we just did here. Again, we are creating a brush. That brush is going to brush to the surface of the underscore surface. Now, in this instance anyway, this is important to note because when we're drawing or when we're doing something, what we do is we're drawing to a particular surface, that information. So we could technically have multiple surfaces and then layer them and then merge them, right? If we wanted to. In this example, we're just going to go through and do just a single surface. But the thing is, we are updating the old surface to the new surface. So before we update the old surface to the new surface, we first off fill that surface with white. And then we go and add our old surface to the new surface. Okay, this makes sure that we can actually keep information upon refresh of the draw area and its scaling effect. Okay, so this is how we actually do certain draw functions. So, we can say rectangle or arc or line 2 or any number of type of things, I guess. And we give it some information. We give it the color information, and then we can do things like fill or stroke or whatever else. Okay, and so I know that doesn't really mean a whole lot, but basically if you go through and do some research on it, those like the stroke, the fill, and stuff like that, those are the actual like actions, I guess. But they do actions, but they don't necessarily commit those actions. So really what you need to do, by the way, at the end of this is say paint. So brush paint. It's kind of like we're setting that information up, right? And this is why it's called a context rather than specifically just a brush. And I know that I'm again re-emphasizing, normally you don't call this brush. But for the sake of trying to understand what's going on and simplifying it, I feel like it's easier to understand as just simply a brush than simply a context. So again, I know the difference, but I'm trying to make it simpler on you all, and I'm trying to ease you into it, as it were. Okay, so we have that. We now have the background drawn. Now what we need to do is actually set up our brush that's currently pointing to the surface. We need to make sure that we can brush to that old surface to the new surface. So what we can do is basically say, load former SUR surface to new surface. Okay, and so what we're going to do then is say, well, so brush, and note that we said set source RGBA or RGB in this instance, actually, right? We actually probably should say RGBA just because, yeah, we should probably just do RGBA instead. Anyway, so don't mind that it's showing as black. I don't know why it's doing it the way it's doing it, but it's supposed to be white, and it's going to be white. So, oh wait, I'm sorry. Do mind it's black. It should be white. 1, 1, 1. Oops. Okay, so then it's still going to be black, but it's showing as black there, but it actually is white now. It was black, but now it is white. I know it's a little confusing. Don't ignore the color thing that's going on with my UI. Anyway, so we're now going to go through and say, well, we could set the source, but we can actually also say set source surface, right? So I'm going to actually just go through and copy a portion of that here. Set brush dot set source surface. So the source surface means that we can copy that old surface onto the new surface, because again, we're like setting the source information, the color, imagine like we're setting the color information. So there are methods to set that information up, whether it be RGB or RGBA or currently the source surface. And what I think happens then is that when you do it this way, it overwrites the state of the source RGBA and says, draw this, right? So it's like setting up the brush to actually point to that surface information instead of the RGBA information, I think, internally. Anyway, so what we then need to do is, well, we need to specify the surface that we are setting the source from. So we'll just say, well, the old source, because we're trying to copy it over, right? So we're going to do just that, surface. And then we just simply do the XY position. And so we're just going to do 0, and then 0, and then you're good to go. So we're setting the source again, and now we can say brush, and then we're going to scale it. We need to scale this information to the new surface. So we're just going to go through and scale, and then we say AW, AH, because that's the new width and height if it's bigger. We're going to ignore if it's smaller, but we have yet to set that up. Now, what we need to do is, oh, by the way, we also do need brush.paint, which I think we already did. Yes, we did, actually. Sweet. Okay. Brush.paint here is going to be the one that actually paints the surface on. So we're going to do, by the way, else here, and then we're going to say self.drawArea dot set underscore width request, or size request, yeah. Underscore REQUEST, parentheses. And what we need to do, by the way, is, I'm going to literally copy this over, but basically what we need is, we need to have current width and current height of the draw area. So I'm just going to go through and create that here. We're going to say, like so. I'm just going to say 0 to default it to, because it's going to get set regardless. So it's okay if it's set to 0 here, because it's always on configure is going to get fired when the draw area loads. So we can go through and just do just that. We're just going to set then that information. Now we need to set that information here. Okay. So that we're going to set up the current width and height. But then we need to use current width and height to update the request to make sure that we're just, updating the request as is. So I'm going to do height like so. Okay. And again, that's pretty much self.success is just creating the new surface. And then we're just returning the flag as such. mean, we really probably could just set it to... Nah, it's okay, because we're going to do return false from here. Anyway, okay. So pretty much right now, if everything's been done correctly, that's a big if. If we go run this, we're going to have then white drawn to the surface. And so if I go ahead and run this, we were expecting stuff to be drawn, but it isn't. Delightful. Oh, yes, I know why. Okay, so I know that we were talking about the surfaces and all that and being copied over. Here's the thing. This information actually still needs to get drawn to the draw area. And that's where the draw or onDraw event happens. The onDraw event draws whatever the surface information is currently. Okay? So what we need to do then is just simply say if then self.surface, right, is not none, none. Then what we can do is say brush set underscore surface, set source surface, and we simply just say self dot surface, comma, and then we just, the start in Y position. So 0, or dot 0.0, comma 0.0. We're pretty much doing the exact same thing that we did for the surface draw of the old surface to the new surface. But then we need to, of course, say brush.paint. So, oh my goodness, please let me just brush dot paint. Because again, we're setting the source information, so we're painting that onto the old surface. So else, and then what we'll do is return and say false. And also, by the way, that needs to actually be indented back one level, and then we just need to do, we're just going to print to the information here saying no surface info, I guess, basically, no surface info. Now, what we do is when we run it, we now should see, of course, that that the information is actually, there. I'm going to zoom this in, Control L, run that, and no surface info. Great. What did I do wrong? Let me reference my notes. I'm going to reference my notes here. So, surface is not none. Set source surface, yep. To be self.surface, yep. We have this size request, be current width and height. Oh, shit. That's going to mess me up a lot. Here, right here. Okay. I can close this out actually because we already have that. Okay. And then when we run it, now we have a white canvas. And when we scale this, it's going to follow, and that surface area information is going to scale with the canvas. Okay. So it's not going to shrink the surface. The surface will keep as big as you make it, but it will not shrink it, so that, if you expand the window, you will, have whatever. Okay. Okay. So that's going to go through and draw the surface information and do the copying over. Obviously, we don't really have, though, anything drawn on there, do we? So this is where now we can kind of start talking about the doing things like with the motion, right? So we actually now have the base information needed to actually do the motion updates and events. And I don't know, man. I mean, this video is getting pretty long, so we may just need to put this for part 3. I think we're just going to do that. So now we're going to start talking about lines, but that's going to be for the next episode. So thank you for watching. Please rate, subscribe, tell me what you think, and I will talk to you all later.